Shida stood frozen in place. She hadn't wanted to admit it to herself, but the sudden confrontation with her longtime superior wasn't easy for her. Even if she didn't doubt everything James had told her, she couldn't quite get herself to believe that the captain had anything to do with their current situation. Although she had to admit it to herself that she wouldn't give anyone else that kind of leeway. The captain stood patiently, gently smiling at nothing as he waited for her answer. His company, who had to be Councilman Kashalengas, however, seemed to be a lot more aflutter, looking around the group excitedly, before his face sank into a more disappointed expression once he apparently realized that he wasn't going to find whatever his eyes were searching for. He once more scanned the faces of the people present, unsurely looking at each of them, one after the other, before finally settling on Shida. He reached his long neck down, leaning his large face close to her as he asked,
"Where is James? Is he not with you?"
The disillusionment in his voice was palpable. With effort, Shida pried her eyes away from the captain and looked back at the reptile spitefully. Trying to make it sound like the distaste in her voice was directed at James instead of the old man, she answered, "You're asking the wrong girl. He just said he'd been away for a while and hasn't gone back to me since." The captain's lips curled in surprise as he heard that. However, the councilman seemingly became even more disappointed, while also completely ignoring the implications she tried to carry with it. However, Shida was preoccupied by lifting a hand towards Curie, indicating for them to keep their big, non-existent mouth shut, as she already knew they were getting ready to contradict her on her lie.
"Is this a bad time?"
Captain Uton carefully asked, lifting one of his big hands as if he wanted to reach for her, but stopping mid-air.
"You two aren't having troubles, are you?"
Okay, good. He was buying it. At least she could have James's back while he did what he needed to do. And since those two were apparently looking for him, keeping them wrapped up in conversation would probably also help him. Good thing that she needed to talk to the captain anyway. However, looking back at his worried face, a pit began to form in her stomach. Just what had the two of them gotten themselves into? "No, not at all," she replied, looking away and trying to keep up her biting tone, causing the captain to look even more concerned. The Rushgak worker and soldier were observing the performance in front of them with badly veiled confusion and concern. They had a short exchange in their native language before the worker turned towards their guests and the new arrivals and suggested, "Maybe we should relocate this matter into a more private area." Everyone glanced over to them, and Shida looked around across the complex. They really were standing extremely exposed, and given where things were going, maybe that wasn't the worst idea. She was about to agree, and judging by the captain's face, he was about to do the same. However, both of them were interrupted by the councilman shaking his large head, plus long neck, and bursting out in a tattered voice,
We don't have time for this."
He turned towards the captain.
"If they don't know where James is, we're wasting our time with them. We should make haste and find him."
The old man urged him vehemently, lifting a quivering hand to put it on Uton's arm. However, the captain brushed it off, barely paying attention to the man.
"I'm going to take the time, old friend,"
he responded in passing, getting down on all fours again to be ready to follow the insectoids.
"Besides, if anyone knows James well enough to know where he's going to be, it will be Shida. But if this is urgent for you, go on ahead without me. I'm sure I can catch up to you in no time."
The councilman looked at him befuddled, and seemingly needed to take a moment to process what he had told him.
But we need to, and James, I can't,"
he stammered, but the captain quickly waved off his concerns.
"Your manners, old boy. James is a nice fellow, he'll hear you out. Just be open with him and things will be fine. Try your luck over another channel, I'll let you know when I find anything out,"
he assured him, while walking up next to Shida, now putting a large hand on her back and gently pushing her along, while the Rushgak worker took the hint and started leading them across the complex towards a more private area. Shida was glad that they had the awareness to not suggest continuing the conversation in her and James's room. The soldier even stayed behind to dutifully guard the door as they had done before Shida arrived. Curie seemed to not quite get what was going on, however they loyally followed after Shida, scuttling along by her side and eyeing her and the captain curiously. Lastly, the councilman looked after them, reaching his long neck high up into the air as his eyes remained locked on the leaving group. He seemed quite lost standing there all by himself on top of the massive complex. However, Shida's well of empathy was rapidly drying up, especially since the stone forming in her gut was getting heavier by the moment. She took deep breaths, trying to calm her nerves, thinking how she should best approach the coming conversation. The worker led the group towards a large trapdoor that opened as soon as one of their legs touched the ground near it, and down a staircase similar to the one that led into her own room in the hive, if much larger. Inside, what looked like a conference room, a large table in the middle and whiteboard at his front included. Given the Rushgak's nature and body type, chairs were, of course, absent. Other than the Hive's hotel rooms, the staff area was kept incredibly plain, no room being wasted on decorations and no thought being wasted on colour. Empty grey walls were the only thing all around. "You will remain undisturbed in this room for as long as you need to, Petty Officer Shida," the worker informed her with a short bow. So, they snooped around her personal info as well. She should probably have expected that. More curious was that the worker seemed to be completely ignoring the captain and Curie. "All right, thank you very much," she replied, causing the worker to take another bow before they turned to leave the room and grant them their privacy. "The satisfaction of our guests is important to us, so let us know if you need anything," they replied, before closing the door, leaving an awkward silence behind. Captain Uton had taken position at the large table, leaning over it in a relaxed position and looking at her expectantly. Did he have to look at her like that? It really didn't make her gut situation any better. Deciding to buy herself a bit more time, Shida slowly skulked over towards the other side of the table, near where Curie was standing, and thoroughly inspecting the whiteboard that took up almost the entire wall. Taking another deep breath, she hoisted herself up onto the table plate and turned towards the captain, her ears buzzing with the blood rushing through it. "So, what did you want from James anyway?" She opened the conversation in the only way she could think of. The captain tilted his head while looking at her, his lips curling unsurely.
"Oh, just some boring political stuff. Nothing you should concern yourself with,"
he replied dismissively. Then he pushed himself up a bit higher and added,
"More importantly, how are things going for you? How's the vacation treating you so far? It's the first you've taken in a while, so I hope you're enjoying yourself."
Was he playing dumb? Or did he actually not suspect anything yet? "Oh yeah, it's fine. A lot wilder than staying back on board, but that's not a bad thing," Shida replied, absently letting one of her claws glide along the table plate while avoiding eye contact. She could hear the captain make some contemplative sounds as he was watching her, but she didn't look over towards him.
"And James?"
he pried further, his voice turning a bit higher at the end.
"How are things going with you?"
She couldn't help but grin at the awkwardness in his voice, turning her face away from the captain so he wouldn't see her expression. "A bit of a personal question, don't you think, sir?" she teased, while pretending to be wildly interested in Curie, who still eyed the whiteboard like it was a mountain of treasure. The captain spluttered, which turned into laughter after a moment as he replied,
"Oh, don't give me that. We've had far more personal talks than this, young lady."
Shida smacked her lips as answer, but did have to fight back a snicker before she could actually reply. "Things are going fine between us. You could even say great given recent developments, so don't you worry about me." She was almost proud of herself for the way that she managed to give her voice just the right amount of sarcastic snark, although it was tainted slightly by the fact that she would have liked to tell the captain these things straight on instead.
"Well, that's not how it sounded earlier. Come on, Shida, you can talk to me, you know that, right?"
the captain said softly, and made to go around the table, but Shida stopped him with a hand raised in his direction. Oh, did he have to use that tone? She had to bite her lip to force down a reaction inside of her. She still needed time to think how to best approach the precarious situation, and this nothing conversation would be good at killing a lot of it, even if it didn't feel too good. "I guess I overreacted a bit," she said absently, and leaned her head onto her right hand. "He's just out and about a lot since we arrived on the station and can't really take me along. I guess I just expected a little more time with him." She could hear the captain loudly exhale through his nose.
"It's almost strange to hear you admit that,"
he commented amusedly, telling her that it sounded real enough to be believable, now to react accordingly. Quickly turning towards him, she lifted one finger and extended his claws, sneering at the large man in the process. "Careful, or the whole you can talk to me thing is over quicker than you can process," she threatened with a sharp look, before it turned into an impish sneer, after the captain seemed to be actually taken aback by her reaction. His face relaxed slowly as she raised her eyebrows at him, and he realized he'd been had. If only he knew just how much.
"You know I didn't mean it like that,"
he explained himself, and sheepishly stroked through the fur on his head with one of his large palms.
"I was just saying that it seems you know, actually seem to care."
Was it really that rare that she gave off that feeling? The captain would know. Maybe this would be the moment then. "I do," she replied earnestly, "which is why there's some more stuff we need to talk about." Her eyes focused in on Uton's, which closed for a moment as he took a deep breath, which he slowly released through his large nostrils, seemingly deflating in the process.
"I feared you would say that,"
he finally said, opening his eyes again and returning her gaze with tired eyes.
"How much do you know?"
So, He was completely ready for this. Maybe he had really just been playing dumb. Not a really nice thought, but one she couldn't fault him for. After all, she had done the same thing. Not as much as I'd like, she replied, her stomach churning as the situation got serious, although she managed to keep her composure. For example, you alluded to knowing who wanted to get into our room earlier. The captain's eyes widened a bit, and he slightly perked up, before slowly settling down again with a chuckle.
Guess I did open my mouth a bit much on that one,
he mused, massaging his chin with one large hand while he talked.
But yes, I know about that. A colleague of Warrant Officer Reprigue was tasked with providing a new way of providing intel on the two of you, after you've so cleverly shut us out. They were unsuccessful, as you may have gathered by now.
Strange that you would just tell me something like that, Sheeta commented suspiciously.
Uton nodded with lowered eyes and agreed. You're absolutely right. I'm definitely not supposed to talk to you about this. However, I have ordered to be completely open with James by now, to try and talk some sense into him after the indirect approach has failed quite spectacularly. Predictably so, if you ask me, but no one ever asked me on the matter,
he explained, waving his right hand around in a circular motion as he talked.
And as far as I can tell, anything I would tell James, you would soon know about anyway, so I might as well skip the middleman. We should have let you know a long time ago anyway. I didn't want you to find out like this.
Sheeta pointed her ears towards him and narrowed her eyes. Big words, she said, with a lazy wave of her hand. I guess you should follow them up with some info, because, honestly, so far the only thing I'm hearing is you trying to talk yourself out of this.
Uton nodded his big head. You're right. So I'll ask again, he said with a low voice, and folded his hands. How much do you know? Quite the story you have to tell there, Dancer. But if you were this secretive about it so far, then why are you telling it to me?
Well, either you already knew everything I just told you anyway, or you're not involved enough to care. Either way, I have somebody to vent to.
And what are you doing there?
Typing out a message to send to your ambassador. Even though I left prematurely, he should still know what's going on so he can act as soon as communications are back up, which should happen one way or the other after I am done here.
Why not tell him when we were there?
Because he wouldn't have let me leave if I did.
For your own safety.
I know that.
Then why did you leave anyway?
Because I don't think that my own safety is what's actually at stake here.
You're a strange creature.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Listen, you should probably leave now. I don't know what will happen, but I know it's not going to be pretty.
Missed the most exciting event in recent history? I don't think so.
Do you have any self-preservation?
Do you?
Forget I asked. I guess there is a reason that our people are allied.
Or maybe we've both lost our minds.
Yeah, that too. Or you actually do work for them as well.
If you think that, why'd you take me along anyway?
If you do, I doubt I could shake you now, and if I keep you close, I can at least keep an eye on you.
Well, either way, where does your plan take you now?
Right to the top, and I know exactly how we'll get there. High Matriarch Tua sat in her office and looked down at her screens. The status updates were slowly coming in. The officers were in position, the security was informed, and crew members had been activated. Things were going according to plan, and the net was slowly closing. Although the captain had gone distracted with his little pet project, well, at least maybe she could be of some use, if she was actually as close to James as they pretended. If they ever found him, that was. Somehow, the ambassador had managed to slip through the gaps, and there was no sign of him so far. Distractedly, she swiped her trunk through the air, bringing up his personal file to let her eyes glide across it. 2 uniform years, or 26 Earth years of age. 13 Earth years of education in school, followed by 3 years of classified activities, after which he pursued higher education for another 5 Earth years, right before expatriating into the galactic community. The 3 classified years appeared to be some sort of military past. So far it hadn't seemed to be of any consequence. However, given recent events, the question of just how extensive their training was became more and more significant. Although no matter his training, he was just one man. Sooner or later, he would not be able to evade their influence. Hopefully, he would see reason before then. He was already too deeply involved to just be chalked up as a failure and disregarded. By now, they would have to make him a success, no matter the failures along the way. It was a pity, although he had no one else to blame but himself. If you keep digging, sometimes you uncover something that you should better not have found. And apparently, poor James had brought an excavator. It would, of course, have been preferable to find someone amenable to their cause, but she had wasted too long for this to be picky now. She was used to working with what she had, and this situation still gave her plenty to work with. Although she also did feel it starting to put tension on her patients. After all this time, why did things have to be held up by such trivialities? Suddenly a noise ripped her out of her pondering. Annoyed, she looked down to her screen, where an obtrusive pop-up window vehemently tried to get her attention with bright colours and loud noises. Exhaling in exasperation, she accepted the call.
I thought I was quite particular in my wish not to be disturbed,
she admonished her assistant, while rubbing her forehead with her trunk.
Yes, I know, Your Highness, but...
Her assistant stumbled and nervously looked into her camera with fear in her eyes. Tua narrowed her eyes onto the screen. The woman being nervous about interrupting her was one thing. She would have even expected trepidation, but fear?
But what? Speak up already,
she ordered imperiously, snapping the girl out of her stupor as she came to attention with a start, saying,
Well, Your Highness, I know you said not to be disturbed, but this is an emergency. The man was quite insistent that you would want to hear him out, and even if you weren't, we couldn't possibly answer for not hearing him out after the substantial threats he's made.
Threats?
Madame Tua asked, righting herself up and staring the woman down, her trunk coming down onto the desk hard.
What threats? Who even is this man?
The assistant swallowed visibly, before she nervously replied,
Well, he says that he's the human ambassador, and if you don't hear him out, there's going to be war.
Tua's expression relaxed slightly, as her eyes slightly widened at the revelation. After all this, he was calling her?
Put him through,
she ordered briefly yet sternly, leaving no room for argumentation. However, that didn't stop her assistant from trying.
But, ma'am, shouldn't we...
she started, but was immediately interrupted by Madame Tua.
Now,
she commanded. The young woman jerked backwards with wide eyes, merely stammering,
Right away, ma'am,
before disappearing from her screen, making way for a black picture that stated, Audio only. And right on cue, James's voice came out of her speakers. About time. I thought you were going to make me wait until you zeroed down on my location. So, he was thinking about that, yet he still stayed on the line.
You distrust me that much?
Tua asked in her sweetest tone, uselessly gesticulating through the air with her trunk as she spoke.
I am disappointed, James.
A sigh could be heard from the other side of the line. Cut the crap, Tua. I'm not in the mood. After all I've heard, it doesn't take a genius to put together that you are at the helm of this whole thing, so please do not insult either of our intelligences by trying to pretend otherwise, James replied crossly, instantly dashing any notions that this may still be an agreeable encounter. And on the locating idea, I wish you good luck with that. Not even my mum could zero in on this phone signal, and she's a total nutcase. They would see about that. For now, it would help to make him stay on the line as long as possible. But for that, should she pretend like she didn't know anything? He could bluff as much as he wanted. There was no way he knew for sure she was involved. Although maybe she also wouldn't want to get on his nerves too much. The last thing she needed now was him getting pettish. It's not like it mattered now.
And do you have any sort of proof for your wild accusations as well?
She asked skittishly, not dropping her tone from before and getting into a more comfortable position before her screen, as she now really started letting the tracking program of the station do its work. A short chuckle erupted from the speakers. Your reaction is all the proof I need, James responded amusedly. Footsteps were audible in the background, so he was still on the move. Had I been off the mark, I would have a whole nother mess to sort out right now, but at least I'd also have the possibility for a powerful ally. Too bad my deduction was dead on. He really was a clever little fellow.
Fine. It's not like it matters now,
High Matriarch Tua conceded, languidly, while watching the process of the tracking program.
Then maybe you would also have the courtesy to tell me why you were calling with such intense strings attached. It's going to take some effort to calm down my poor assistant after you've given her such a shock.
A small headache, all things considered, but still unpleasant. Also, he seemed like the kind of person who still cared about things like that. Yeah, sorry about that. Do apologize to her in my stead, James answered with a fake laugh. His footsteps still faintly echoing out of the speakers. I was really surprised that she wasn't in the know and had to improvise after she wouldn't let me talk to you. I thought War with the Humans would at least get her to listen. And I mean, given the circumstances, it felt kind of natural. Well, if she had expected him to try and call her of all things, she would of course have kept a proper channel open for that. But who in the galaxy would expect something like that, after he had seemingly gone through so much effort to avoid contact?
It would have been easier to just appear before me,
she proposed, facetiously. She was beginning to enjoy this little conversation. It was a welcome reprieve from the incompetence she felt constantly surrounded by.
You know where my office is. I would gladly have invited you in for our talk, an offer that is still open, for your information.
James exhaled audibly through his nose. No thank you, he replied dismissively, while the sounds of his desk was replaced with different thumps, clanks, and strained breaths for a moment. I thought I'd try it your way for a while, with hiding and sneaking and all that, but you're welcome to try and find me. Otherwise the hiding part would be kind of boring. It was Tua's turn to snicker now. He was quite bold, the little monkey. How adorable.
I may just accept that challenge, but you really think you can offer any difficulty for my personnel?
She vexed, while looking at the map that her computer was showing her by now. He was somewhere near the administrative area. However, somehow the system had problems with pinning down anything more exact than that. The signal seemed to be traceable to multiple locations at once. What kind of phone was he using? We'll see about that, James replied, breathing a bit more heavily than before, but keeping up his self-assured tone. While I hated my training, there were two things I was actually good at: sneaking and shooting. So make sure none of your people gives me a gun, or you will have twice the problem all of a sudden. Unless you want to up the difficulty, of course. He sounded confident, she had to give him that. At least he was taking the situation with humour. That could indicate good things for the task going forwards. However, maybe she should still make sure that he actually realised the situation that he was in. She did have to admit, the thought made her smile.
Intriguing, but I think I have a better idea, she said, in a smoothingly soft tone, her ears fluttering in delight. After all, there are many ways of getting somebody out of their hideout, and finding them is only one of those. You can also entice them to come out.
A sudden burst of sound out of her speakers interrupted her abruptly. Now I know what you're going to say, and I would advise against it, James suddenly exclaimed, taking the matriarch by surprise, and she recoiled slightly from the screen. I've already sent a message to each of my acquaintances, telling them to not leave the embassies no matter what, and I doubt you want to give those any reason to get suspicious right now. Your reach may be large, but it can't be infinite, or you wouldn't have bothered with all the secrecy. Besides, while I don't know what exactly you are after, I do feel like I'm still being quite personable here. You trying to threaten me with the people I care about may change that, however. And who knows? It may even give me some dumb ideas. So let's keep useless threats to a minimum. Please. Brazen indeed. But at least he was giving her something to work with here. And maybe it was indeed better to keep him pacified for now. At least as they neither knew where he was, or what he was doing. However, while his display had been endearing at first, it was starting to get on her nerves. It almost seemed like he actually thought he was in control, just because he could add two and two together decently well. Then again, she already had an idea how to make it up to him. With a swipe of her trunk, she pushed his personnel file aside, and instead opened a different one. He was a scientist, wasn't he? Maybe he would like a little experiment. Question. Just how much loyalty is a purely opportunistic species actually capable of? Subject. One petty officer first-class Sheeda. Now, just to find a fitting test for her. And she already knew exactly who would be conducting it. You've gone pretty quiet. You're not upset with me, are you? James asked, apparently about as eager to keep her occupied as the other way around.
Oh, not at all, she replied sweetly. I just had something to attend to real quick. But now, let us continue our talk. I'm sure you still have some questions, haven't you?
James exhaled audibly, once again replying, Do I ever? Did you also get that message? R. What's going on? F.
Is everyone getting activated?
C. Seems like it. N. But why? Are there problems with the ship? C. Seems like we're called on the station, actually. But is that even in our field of activity? F. Who cares? Orders are orders. R. I don't know about this. C. Captain's orders. Pull yourself together and get going. N. Yes, ma'am. C. R. F.
To be fair, who would have guessed that we just smashed the thing?
Captain Uton laughed and shook his big head with folded hands.
Excuse me, but I have to ask, was that your idea or James's?
It was a collective decision, Sheeda said distractedly, while letting her eyes glide over the message that had briefly interrupted the conversation earlier, another time. Whatever happens, don't leave the embassy until I give you the all clear. Of course, I can't actually give you any orders, but please, trust me on this one. James. Just what was he doing? She couldn't concentrate on it now, but damn it, she hoped he was being careful. But I still don't quite get it. Camera footage, constant surveillance, at least 3 people tasked with observation and a whole ton of intergalactic laws broken. That is quite a lot of work to keep an eye on somebody just because, and so far it doesn't sound like any of it was necessary to me, she commented, turning her mind and eyes away from the text and her assistant, with a wild shake of her head. He still wasn't speaking completely straightforward with her, and it was just about time that he actually got into the juicy detail. Periphery data well and good, but it was time to get to the core of the matter, and it had been quite a while. Uton made a contemplative sound.
Well, I guess it depends how you define necessary,
he mused aloud, and scratched through the phone in his neck.
I will agree, it wasn't strictly necessary, but it gave us a sense of security. We wanted to find out how James ticks to make sure we approach this the right way, and we didn't want to miss a second.
Sheila snorted. Well, that backfired royally, didn't it? She commented amusedly, and leaned sideways against the table.
I can neither confirm nor deny,
Uton answered with a tired chuckle, before turning his gaze towards her and continuing.
But you're right. It has become abundantly apparent by now that our usual methods were a rather poor choice for our unusual guest. But we didn't know that at the time. And once we knew and decided to change course, well, I don't have to tell you it was already too late.
I just don't get how you expected anything but animosity coming out of this, she had commented with an unbelieving look.
Well, it's not like you were supposed to find out at any point,
Uton replied with a wave of his massive hand.
Usually information gathered like this is used more subtly.
Right, so you don't step on any landmines when you come and... what? Invite them into your secret organization? She'd asked, stretching out an open palm as she spoke, physically demanding an answer.
That makes it sound quite ominous, don't you think?
Uton replied, curling his lips. She'd only gave him a strict look as her answer.
All right. I guess it is quite ominous looking in on the outside,
the captain admitted, with an exhausted exhale and avoided eye contact.
But you basically got it right. By studying our POIs, we can approach them in a way that makes them more receptive to our cause. Otherwise they may take it the wrong way.
Speaking of your cause, I'm still not sure I've completely understood what you're after. Interrupt me if I'm wrong, but from what I've gathered so far, you all are part of some weird subgroup of the galactic government or military or whatever that has made it their sworn mission to bring the galactic community to some strange, arbitrary sense of unity by acting against everyone who doesn't quite seem to adapt to the community the right way, possibly motivated by its age-old motto that was most likely put in place by your own ancestors, if I had to put my money on something. James listed off, while skulking along through the darkness, with Conglorch loyally and silently following behind him without saying a word. He was good at following orders, James had to give him that. Well, at least that was true if he respected the person giving the orders.
I wouldn't call it strange or arbitrary,
Madame Tua's voice echoed out from the speakers of his phone, which he kept wedged between his shoulder and his chin, as he needed to maneuver around something blocking his way in the dark with both hands.
But given the limited information you are going off of, that is quite the impressive summation. How did you reach that conclusion?
James suddenly helped Conglorch's massive frame to also avoid the obstacle, before he replied. Well, it's not like you were trying to hide it a whole lot. I mean, you did at the start, but then you just kinda stopped. Was there a reason for that, I wonder? He took his phone back in his hand and rotated his arching neck, which was starkly protesting the position he had previously held it in, until it let out a satisfying crack.
Things weren't going so well, and we felt you slipping away from the right path.
The sickly sweet voice of Madame Tua came out of the speaker once more.
It felt like a more direct approach was in order, for better or for worse.
James gifted her a faint chuckle. I guess worse it was in this case, huh? He asked scornfully, and narrowed his eyes to try and see anything, but it was of no use. After being exposed to near constant light, his eyes had trouble getting used to the darkness again, and even if they hadn't, there was nearly no residual light in this place. He wondered how the Lizardor was taking all of this information. It was hard to imagine his reaction, given that he had not yet known him for very long.
Regrettably so. Believe me or not, but I would have much preferred a more amiable encounter with you as well. It would have been very beneficial for the both of us,
Madame Tua responded, with an almost longing sound in her voice that almost made him feel his bile rise up. It really was a good thing he wasn't face to face with her. He wasn't quite sure how well he would have himself under control, given his many reasons to dislike the matriarch. Oh, please, don't spare me the details. I'm quite curious how you imagined a more amiable encounter between the two of us. He gave back, despite the creeps running down his back. He wondered how far they were from their destination, although it probably was still quite a bit. they had to walk.
We slowly introduce people into our ranks, step by step, as to not overwhelm them with everything, Captain Uton explained. Although I have to admit, I'm not so sure even that would have worked on James.
Playing up the theatrics, Sheeta threw her arms in the air as she mockingly replied, "Oh, so you don't just walk up to people and say, 'Hey, how's it going? We're the secret shadow organization that blows up laboratories and stalks ambassadors. Wouldn't you like to help us rule the galaxy and get rid of everything that makes us turn up our noses? Great! I was almost getting worried that you were coming on too strong while recruiting new drones to your collective." She slammed her hands down on the table, causing Curie behind her to jump while the captain just looked back at her with an unreadable expression.
"You're not being very fair, you know,"
the captain commented with pursed lips. Once again, Sheeta had no response for him apart from a dark look. His eyes slightly widened, and he leaned back, lifting his hands to a calming gesture.
"All right, I get it already. But honestly, it's nowhere near that dark. I know you may not believe me, but we're trying to make things better,"
he explained with a soft chuckle. But Sheeta's gaze did not ease up in the slightest, and neither did her mood. He could talk the talk all he wanted. Deeds matter more than words, and there was still a big deed in the room that remained unexplained. "And the bombing?" she asked, deadly serious. "James said it himself. He can deal with the stalking, so I'm not going to hold that against you too much. But honestly, trying to blow someone to hell is a step too far, don't you think?" She not so subtly looked over towards Curie and basically forced the captain to do the same. The discomfort in his face while looking at their metal body was palpable, but Sheeta had to wonder whether that was because of guilt or merely his distaste for their nature.
"I wasn't in favor of that idea,"
he said, quickly looking away from the cyborg again. "But you didn't exactly stop it either," Sheeta pushed further, not giving the captain room to breathe.
"That was not inside my power,"
the captain answered somberly, turning his gaze away even further. But Sheeta leaned closer towards him, across the table, and unflinchingly asked, "Did you even try?" Uton avoided her gaze, as his face transformed into a placid mask of itself. It seemed that he needed to somehow get over himself before he could answer. But his moment of gathering resolve was interrupted by a sudden, loud ringing. Everyone in the room jumped, as the unfitting, insistent jingle pierced the silence left behind by Sheeta's question. After a moment of shock, Uton looked down at his waist, and his heart seemed to think as he looked at his screen to see who was messaging him. "Your boss?" Sheeta coldly guessed, staring at her superior with predatory eyes. "Is she tired of you wasting time with trash like me?" Uton took a long, deep breath.
"Actually, they're orders,"
he said, with a grave expression, and started unstrapping his assistant from his arm, finally sliding the massive screen over towards Sheeta.
"And they are specifically for you."